Hi, third graders. This is Miss Drewery. I'm going to read Chapter 3 of Ramona Quimby, age 8, to you guys. It's called The Hard-Boiled Egg Fad. After I read this chapter, we're going to conduct a couple of science experiments. The first one is going to have to do with eggs. How do you tell the difference between a hard-boiled egg and a raw egg? And we're going to do this experiment using the scientific process. All right, Chapter 3, The Hard-Boiled Egg Fad. With all four members of the family leaving at different times in different directions, mornings were flurried in the Quimby household. On the days when Mr. Quimby had an 8 o'clock class, he left early in the car. Beezus left next because she walked to school and because she wanted to stop for Mary Jane on the way. Ramona was third to leave. She enjoyed these last few minutes alone with her mother now that Mrs. Quimby no longer reminded her that she needed to be nice to Willa Jean. "Did you remember to give me a hard-boiled egg in my lunch like I asked?" Ramona inquired one morning. This week, hard-boiled eggs were popular with third graders, a fad started by Yardape, who sometimes brought his lunch. Last week, the fad had been individual bags of corn chips. Ramona had been left out of that fad because her mother objected to spending money on junk food. Surely her mother would not object to a nutritious, hard-boiled egg. "Yes, I remembered the hard-boiled egg, you little rabbit," said Mrs. Quimby. "I'm glad you have finally learned to like them." Ramona did not feel it necessary to explain to her mother that she still did not like hard-boiled eggs, not even when they had been dyed for Easter. Neither did she like soft-boiled eggs, because she did not like slippery, slithery food. Ramona liked deviled eggs, but deviled eggs were not the fad, at least not this week. On the bus, Ramona and Susan compared lunches. Each was happy to discover that the other had a hard-boiled egg, and both were eager for lunchtime to come. While Ramona waited for lunch period, school turned out to be unusually interesting. After the class had filled out their arithmetic or math workbooks, Mrs. Whaley handed each child a glass jar containing about 2 inches of a wet blue substance. She explained that it was oatmeal dyed blue. Ramona was the first to say yuck. Most people made faces, and Yardape made a gagging noise. "Okay, kids, quiet down," said Mrs. Whaley. When the room was quiet, she explained that for science they were going to study fruit flies. The blue oatmeal contained fruit fly larvae. "And why do you think the oatmeal is blue?" she asked. Several people thought that the blue dye was some sort of food for the larvae, vitamins maybe. Marcia suggested the oatmeal was dyed blue so the children wouldn't think it was good to eat. Everybody laughed at this guess. Who would ever think cold oatmeal was good to eat? Yardape came up with the right answer. The oatmeal was dyed blue so the larvae could be seen, and so they could. Little white specks. As the class bent over their desks making labels for their jars, Ramona wrote her name on her slip of paper and added, "Age 8, which she always wrote after her signature. And then she drew tiny fruit flies around it before she pasted the label on her very own jar of blue oatmeal and fruit fly larvae. Now she had a jar of pets. "That's a really neat label, Ramona," said Mrs. Whaley. Ramona understood that her teacher did not mean tidy when she said neat, but extra good. Ramona decided she liked Mrs. Whaley after all. The morning was so satisfactory that it passed quickly. When lunchtime came, Ramona collected her lunchbox and went off to the cafeteria where, after waiting in line for her milk, she sat at a table with Sarah, Janet, Marcia, and other third-grade girls. She opened her lunchbox, and there, tucked in a paper napkin, snug between her sandwich and an orange, was her hard-boiled egg, smooth and perfect, the right size to fit her hand. Because Ramona wanted to save the best for the last, she ate the center of her sandwich, tuna fish, and she poked a hole in her orange so she could suck out the juice. Third graders did not peel their oranges. At last it was time for the egg. There were a number of ways of cracking eggs. The most popular, and the real reason for bringing an egg to school, was knocking the egg against one's head. There were 2 ways of doing so, by a lot of timid little raps, or by one big whack. Sarah was a rapper. Ramona, like Yard Ape, was a whacker. She took a firm hold on her egg. She waited until everyone at her table was watching, and whack! She found herself with a handful of crumbled shell and something cool and slimy running down her face. Everyone at Ramona's table gasped. Ramona needed a moment to realize what had happened. Her egg was raw. Her mother had not boiled her egg at all. She tried to brush that yellow yolk and slithery white out of her hair and away from her face, but she had only succeeded in making her hands eggy. Her eyes filled with tears of anger, which she tried to brush away with her wrists. The gasps at her table turned into giggles. From another table, Ramona caught a glimpse of Yard Ape grinning at her. Marcia, a tall girl who always tried to be motherly, said, "It's all right, Ramona. I'll take you to the bathroom and help you wash off the egg." Ramona was not one bit grateful. "You go away," she said, ashamed of being so rude. She did not want this third-grade girl treating her like a baby. The teacher who was supervising lunch period came over to see what the commotion was about. Marcia gathered up all the paper napkins from the lunch boxes at the table and handed them to the teacher, who tried to sop up the egg. Unfortunately, the napkins did not absorb egg very well. Instead, they smeared yolk and white around in Ramona's hair. Her hair felt stiff as egg white began to dry. "Take her to the office," the teacher said to Marcia. "Mrs. Larson will help her." "Come on, Ramona," said Marcia, as if Ramona were in kindergarten. She put her hand on Ramona's shoulder because Ramona's hands were too eggy to touch. Ramona jerked away. "I can go by myself." With that reply, she ran out of the cafeteria. She was so angry she was able to ignore the giggles and the few sympathetic looks of the other children. Ramona was mad at herself for following a fad. She was furious with Yard Ape for grinning at her. Most of all, she was angry with her mother for not boiling the egg in the first place. By the time she reached the office, Ramona's face felt as stiff as a mask. Ramona almost ran into Mr. Whitman, the principal, who would have upset her even more. He was someone Ramona always tried to avoid ever since Beezus had told her that the way to remember how to spell the kind of principal who was the principal of a school was to remember the word ended in PAL, P-L-E, not P-L-E, because the principal was her pal. Ramona did not want the principal to be her pal. She wanted him to mind his own business, aloof and important in his office. Mr. Whitman must have felt the same way because he almost jumped quickly aside. Mrs. Larson, the school secretary, took one look at Ramona. She sprang from her desk and she said, "Well, you need a little help, don't you?" Now, we're going to stop there in the middle of chapter 3. It's a very lengthy chapter. And we're going to talk about eggs. Now, Ramona had quite a catastrophe at lunch. So, what are some ways maybe that we could have told the difference between a hard-boiled egg and a raw egg? Because when you look at the two, they look exactly the same. They came out of the same container. They're both white. They're both shiny. They both feel like they weigh the same amount. So just by looking at these with my eye, I can't tell a difference. But what if I use some light? So I have a flashlight here. Now I have mixed these eggs up. I have no idea which one is which. Alright, so now I'm going to look at this egg first. But, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about the scientific process. So the first thing that you do is you have to come up with a question. So my question is this egg raw or is it boiled? So I know one is raw, one is boiled, and I'm going to try to figure out which one is which. So the hypothesis is, what do I think? What do I think is going to happen? When I use this light, I think the egg that is going to be the darkest is going to be the hard-boiled egg. So now I'm ready to conduct my experiment, which is my third step. So I'm going to shine this flashlight on both of the eggs. All right, so here's my first egg. All right, so when I look at it, it just looks like a white egg. I cannot tell anything different. Sorry, I'm trying to get it centered. There we go. All right, so now let's look at the other egg. Let me get up close. Can you tell the color of that egg? Look, it's almost like it's glowing. So this light is shining through the egg. So that's what you can see there. So the reason for this, I'm analyzing my data here. The reason for this, I know that a raw egg is runny, so it's liquid. And I know that you guys have studied matter in the sports science class. So when you think of the particles in a solid, they're moving around. There's more space in between them. But when you think of the particles of I'm sorry, I think I said that wrong. When you think of the particles of a liquid, they're further apart. They can move around. There's more space in between them so light can get through. But now I think that this one is my hard-boiled egg because no light got through. And I know the particles in a solid are tight together and they don't move. Okay, so here is my hard-boiled egg. I'm going to test this one more time with my light. Make sure I had the right one. Okay, so I can't tell a difference here. I think this is my hard one. I'm going to put that one to the side. When I look at this one, it's glowing, right? So the light's going through. So I'm going to put this one on this side. Now, I've analyzed my data, so now I'm going to see if this is correct. I'm going to crack this on my head. Whop. And yes, we have a hard-boiled egg. Thank goodness. No ooey-gooey stuff's running down my face. All right, so one more science experiment. So I'm going to take this raw egg. Now, we know that this raw egg has a hard shell on the outside. So now I'm going to pose a different question. Can I remove this shell without cracking it? All right, so my hypothesis is I think I can remove this shell without cracking it by using an acid. Now, when I think of acid, I think of I know battery acid that's in a battery that makes your car run. I know that it's very, you're not supposed to get it on your skin because it can burn you. And I know that acids, strong acids can eat things. So I'm thinking maybe that vinegar, which is not a very strong acid because vinegar is found in some foods, you can use vinegar to color your Easter eggs. I know that it's not very strong, but it is an acid. So I have a jar of vinegar, and I've poured my vinegar in this glass, which is 16 ounces. This is 2 cups. 16 ounces is 2 cups. All right, so I'm going to take that raw egg, and I'm going to put it in a Ziploc bag, and I'm going to add my vinegar. Okay, I'm going to set it down so I don't spill it. Okay, so I've got just vinegar in this bag, and I'm going to drop it back down into my container. Now, the egg, sorry, let me hold it up so you can see. It just looks like vinegar. There's nothing going on to the egg right now. So I'm going to put it in this jar, and then tomorrow we're going to look at it and see if there are any differences. Okay, so thank you for coming, for watching my video, and we will look at this egg tomorrow and finish chapter 3.